Hi, Great Gators. Mrs. Collins here. And it's weekend, so it's time to continue our reading that we started last weekend. If you're following along to Spring According to Humphrey. Last weekend, we did chapters 1 through 3. Today, we'll do chapters 4, 5, and 6. Let's go. The first chapter, chapter 4, is the big oops. This will be a fun weekend, Humphrey, just Joey told me as he carried my cage to the car. Right, Mom? We drove for a while, then the car stopped. I've waited for this a long time, Joey said. I know, his mom answered. It was just hard to find the right weekend. It's a long way to your dad's house. I don't think Humphrey would be comfortable on such a long drive, but your dad had to work on a special project, so you're with me this weekend for a change. Joey picked up the cage, and I could feel him carry me up the sidewalk. I heard his mother put the key in the door. My whiskers wiggled and my tail twitched as I braced myself for Skipper's barks. Dog barks can be as painful to my ears as a whistle blast. But there was no barking. Where was Skipper? Once we were in the house, Joey uncovered my cage. This is my house, Humphrey, he said. It's just an ordinary house, I guess. Nothing special. It's great, I said. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a glimpse of Skipper. Joey's mom leaned down to look at me. Hello, Humphrey, she said. You're just as handsome as Joey said you are. I knew right away that I liked her. Show Mom how you can spin, Joey told me. I leaped onto my wheel and started running. Wow, look at him go, Joey's mom said. That's better than an hour at the gym. Joey looked around. Where's Skipper? Yes, where's Skipper? I squeaked. Oh, Becca offered to take him for a walk, his mom said. Wasn't that nice? Yes, I squeaked. I know how much my classmates love their pet cats and dogs, but much of the time they aren't hamster friendly. In fact, they are usually hamster scary. So whoever Becca was, I silently thanked her. I crossed my toes and hoped it would be a very long walk. Joey leaned down close to my cage. Becca lives across the street, he said. She'll be back soon with Skipper. I can't wait for you to meet him. Eek! I didn't mean to squeak, but I couldn't help it. I have so much to show you, Joey told me. I want you to see my room and Skipper catching a frisbee. Could we skip the frisbee part? I asked. Unfortunately, all that Joey heard was squeak, squeak, squeak. He carried my cage to his room and gave me a tour. Here's my bed, Humphrey, he said, and my desk and my dresser. Oh, and here's my closet. I appreciated the tour, but when humans carry my cage, it swings back and forth and my tummy feels a little strange. I was happy when Joey set my cage on his desk and I wasn't swaying so much. Is everything okay? Joey's mom asked from the hallway. Yep, just Joey said. Yep, I squeaked so far. I hopped on my wheel for another good spin, which helps me relax. I sure would like to have a hamster like you for a pet, Joey said, settling on the bed. I thought it would be very nice to be Joey's pet, but he already had a pet dog. And I love my job as a classroom pet. I heard a pitter-patter, and before I knew it, a furry creature raced through the bedroom door. Hi, Skipper, Joey said. Meet Humphrey. I braced myself as he trotted toward my cage. Skipper was a medium-sized dog, white with brown spots. He looked up at the cage and wagged his tail. He raised his nose and sniffed, so I scurried to the back of my cage to get as far away from him as I could. You can't be too careful. All the while, Joey talked to Skipper, explaining that I'm a hamster and I live in his classroom. Skipper wagged some more, and then he did something unexpected. He trotted out of the room. I've met a few dogs nose to nose in the past, and they were all interested in me. In fact, they wouldn't leave me alone. They had bad breath and big teeth, and they all looked as if they thought I'd make a tasty little snack. I realized for the first time that, like humans and hamsters, dogs are not all alike. Maybe this would be a fun weekend after all. The next morning when Joey woke up, his mom came into the room and asked what he wanted to do for the day. Skipper was nowhere in sight. I really want to take Humphrey to the backyard to watch Skipper catch a frisbee, Joey said. His mom shook her head. That would be fun, but it's too cold for Humphrey to go outside. That was unsqueakably nice of her because I didn't want my whiskers to freeze over. How about your homework? She said. Signs of spring, I squeaked. Joey's mom laughed. Humphrey seems to know your assignment. I do, I answered. I write them in my notebook. We're supposed to be looking for signs of spring, Joey said. He stared out the window and sighed. I sure haven't seen any yet, except for the flower we saw in the snow. A crocus, I added, trying to be helpful. I don't think we'll find signs of spring in the house, she said. Why don't we take Skipper out for a walk and see what we can find? We could go to the nature preserve over by Potter's Pond. Joey glanced over at my cage. What about Humphrey? I'm supposed to take care of him for the whole weekend. I think he'll be all right for an hour or two, his mom said. Right, Humphrey? Right, I answered, and I meant it because I was feeling a little sleepy and was looking forward to taking a nice nap. Before I knew it, they were gone and I was dozing in my sleeping hut. I'm not sure how long they were gone, but when Joey walked back into the room, I scrambled out of my sleeping hut. What did you find? I asked. Joey slumped down in a chair next to my cage. No signs of spring except a couple of blades of grass, he said. He looked discouraged, so I said, That's a great beginning. I just wished he could understand me. I'll bet this is the latest spring in the history of the planet, he said, and the planet is pretty old. Maybe, I squeaked. Joey stared at me for a few seconds. Humphrey, I really want you to see Skipper catch a frisbee, but Mom won't let me take you outside, and she won't let me throw it inside. It would have been nice to see the trick, but I didn't want to go outside in the cold, and I wasn't too sure about discs flying all over the room. Suddenly, Joey sat up. Hey, I could put your cage on the windowsill. I'll take Skipper outside this window and you can watch. It was such an unsqueakably great plan. I wished I'd thought of it. Soon my cage was right next to the window, about a foot above the bed. It wasn't long before Joey raced out into the yard and waved his frisbee at me. It was a flat red circle with tooth marks around the edge. Skipper was right behind Joey, looking like he was ready to play. Joey looked at me, then raised his frisbee and let it fly. It soared up, and it started to come down. Skipper leaped way off the ground and caught it in his mouth. Bravo, I squeaked, clapping my front paws together. Joey looked toward the window and put his thumbs up. He knew that meant something good. I could tell he was getting ready to throw the frisbee again, but I was frustrated because the bars of my cage, which gave me good protection, blocked my view a bit. Quickly, I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and scrambled up the outside of my cage to the very top. Ah, what a nice view. Joey raised his arm and tossed the frisbee. It went even higher this time, and it started to come down. Skipper jumped way up in the air and caught it perfectly. Way to go, I cheered, jumping up and down on top of my cage. Uh-oh, the cage was wobbling. I didn't weigh much at all, but I guess all my jumping nudged the cage towards the edge of the windowsill. All of a sudden, it started tipping over. I flew off the cage and rolled a bit. I came to a stop close, but not too close to the edge. I am unsqueakably lucky that beds are soft and nice. My heart was pounding, but once I caught my breath, I looked over and saw a disaster. My bedding and food were scattered across the bedspread. Luckily, my water bottle hadn't leaked, and my notebook was still firmly tucked behind the mirror. Oops. I leaped to my feet and tried to push the cage upright, but it was no use. I was in trouble, and so was Joey. Big trouble. Humphrey's spring things. Eek! This was an awful thing. So far, I wasn't loving spring. Chapter 5. The Silly Specks. Joey's mom discovered the disaster first. Joey, she yelled, tapping out the window. Come in at once. Hi, I squeaked to let her know everything was all right. Poor Humphrey, she said, reaching her hand toward me. I won't hurt you. She didn't either. She gently scooped me up in her hand, and Joey raced into the room. What's wrong? He asked. His mom wasn't happy. She pointed to the mess on the bed. This, she said. You put the cage on the windowsill and it fell off. Somehow, poor little Humphrey got out of his cage. And look at the mess. I'm fine, I squeaked. Really, it was exciting. Joey looked surprised. Mom, I made sure it was fine. Look, there's plenty of room for the cage to fit on the windowsill. You're going to clean this up now, she said. Then I'll wash your bedspread. Sure, Joey said. Don't be mad, Mom. I just wanted him to see Skipper catch the frisbee. Joey was true to his word. He's about the best cage cleaner in the world. First, he made a little space for me on the table, surrounded by books so I couldn't scamper or fall off. Then he cleaned up the mess on the bed, washed my cage, and put in new bedding. Before long, my cage looked better than ever, and I was back home at last. Joey's mom had to admit he'd done a great job. She was bundling up the bedspread when the doorbell rang. Skipper barked a little bit, but then he stopped. Good dog. I'll get it, she said. Me too, Joey said as he followed her out of the room. I waited, and then Joey returned. His mom was right behind him carrying a large aquarium. Humphrey, this is amazing, Joey said as his mom set the aquarium cage next to my cage on the desk. Wait till you see it. It is pretty amazing, Joey's mom agreed. I told my dad that we were looking for signs of spring, and he sent this kit with 2 tadpoles, Joey explained. Tadpoles are found in ponds in the spring, and then they turn into frogs. Frogs? Like my friend Og? I scrambled to the side of the cage to get a closer look, and all I saw was a little bit of jelly floating in the tank with 2 black specks. They're just specks, I said. See, Humphrey, Joey said, this is how Og started out. I don't think so, I squeaked back. There's no way a large green creature could start out as a tiny black speck. I know it's hard to believe, but we're going to see for ourselves, he said. Wasn't it nice of my dad to send it to me? Joey's mom and dad were divorced and didn't live together anymore. In fact, Joey's dad lived in a whole different town. It was nice, his mom said, but we'll have to read the instructions to make sure we know how to take care of these things. Joey stared at the strange specks. I could tell by his eyes that he was unsqueakably excited. Suddenly he jumped up. I have a great idea, he cried. I could take them to school and the whole class could watch the tadpoles turn into frogs. That's a great idea, his mom said. Much better than keeping them here. I don't think Joey's mom was very excited about learning to take care of tadpoles. She quickly added, I'll email Mrs. Brisbane to see if it's all right with her. Joey didn't even notice his mother leave the room. He was too busy staring at the specks. Skipper raced through the door. I felt jumpy, but once again, he didn't even come close to the cage. He just flopped down on the floor and fell asleep. Phew. Joey didn't take his eyes off the aquarium. Humphrey, I can't wait to see those little specks grow heads and tails and feet and just keep growing until they are real frogs. I crossed my paws and hoped they would, but I wasn't sure at all. I had never seen Joey so excited. He's usually quiet, and sometimes I think he doesn't realize how many things he can do. He's good at art and knows a lot about animals, and he's very good at taking care of me. In fact, I think he'd make a positively great animal doctor. Joey eagerly read the instruction booklet that came with the thingies. Oh, I get it, he said as he read. Then he looked at me and said, Here's how it works, Humphrey. These are like eggs in a yolk. They'll feed on the yolk, and pretty soon they'll become tadpoles. Eek, I squeaked. Joey read on. Any day now, they'll get legs and a head, and after a while, arms. Frogs have arms? I wondered. Then the tadpole will look like a small frog with a long tail, Joey said. Wow, this is the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me. It was nice to see Joey so happy, happy, happy. Did I tell you they're leopard frogs? Joey asked. No, 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 I squeaked. I have seen pictures of the creatures called leopards. They are strong and beautiful with spotted fur, but their teeth are large, sharp, and fearsome. Much worse than the teeth of a dog. Just think about leopards made my tail switch, twitch, and my whiskers wiggle. I may be friends with a frog, but I don't think I could ever be friends with a leopard. Does the book mention if leopard frogs have teeth? I squeaked. How I wish Joey could understand me. Og may have an enormous mouth, but at least he doesn't have teeth. It takes a while to turn into a frog, but it will sure be something to see, Joey said. Then he leaped up. As he ran out of the room, he said, I've got to call Dad to say thank you. I'm used to sitting in my cage next to a tank containing a frog. I'm not used to sitting in my cage next to a tank containing specks. I turned to stare at them, but they didn't say anything. Hello, I finally squeaked. I'm Humphrey. I'm a hamster. They didn't even say boing. How rude. I needed to get a better look at the specs, but I waited until that night when Joey was in bed. I hardly ever open my lock that doesn't lock when a human is in the room, but I could see by the glow of Joey's nightlight that he was sound asleep. I jiggled my lock open without making any noise. Then I slowly walked over to the aquarium, which was lit by the nightlight as well. There they were, two specks in a clear jelly like goo. I stared at them, but they didn't move. They didn't do anything. They looked like two eyeballs staring back. They certainly looked more like eyeballs than frogs. I watched for a while, but to squeak the truth, the specks were pretty boring. So I scurried back to my cage and I quietly pulled the cage door shut. It was hard to understand why Joey was so excited about the tadpoles. But then, humans are always hard to understand. When Joey jumped out of bed the next morning, he raced to the aquarium to look at the specks. Good morning, Joey, I squeaked. Hi, Humphrey, he said without even looking at me. Just checking out the tadpoles. He leaned in close and stared at them. I'm pretty sure they didn't do anything. When he finally straightened up and looked at me, he said, Nothing yet. Then he perked up. Oh, I need to draw a picture of them for the bulletin board. I didn't think it would take a long time to draw two specks, seconds maybe. But Joey leaned over a piece of paper with his colored pencils and drew and drew and drew. He used several crayons, even though there wasn't much to draw. At one point, Joey's mom said, Hey, Joey, how about breakfast? Coming soon, he called back. I've got to get this right. When he was finished, he inspected it and then nodded his head. Not too bad. Then he jumped up and ran out of the room. See you later, Humphrey. I was pretty sure that eating breakfast took a while, so once the coast was clear, I jiggled my lock that doesn't lock and scurried over to look at Joey's drawing. It's not easy for a small hamster to look at a large piece of paper, but I studied what Joey had drawn, and it was beautiful. Where I'd seen two specks in clear jelly, Joey had seen so much more. The specks were black, but the jelly was yellow and light green and really beautiful. When I glanced at the aquarium, I saw that the jelly really was yellow and green and shimmering. I couldn't risk being caught outside of my cage, so I raced back and closed the door behind me. When Joey returned from breakfast, he took some photos of the specks. I want to show Dad what they look like, he said. Then he took a picture of me. I stood still and smiled. I'm not sure he could tell I was smiling, but Joey said, Great. He raced out of the room again. I haven't seen him so excited in a long time, I squeaked out loud. The specks had nothing to say. Humphrey's spring things. Can a speck become a frog? Did a speck turn into Og? Chapter 6. Swim, swim, swim. On Monday, Joey's mom threw a small blanket over the aquarium and another one over my cage, and I began my dark journey back to school. Mrs. Brisbane was excited about having the tadpoles, she said, but I'm not sure we need the blankets. It's a beautiful day. Really? I squeaked, because I couldn't see anything. Once my cage was uncovered and I was back on the table by the windowsill in room 26. Boing, boing, Og's strange voice rang out. Be prepared, Og, I squeaked back at him. You're going to see something surprising. Joey's mom set the aquarium on the table between Og's tank and my cage, then hurried off to work. Soon, all my classmates were crowded around the table asking Joey what was in the aquarium. Mrs. Brisbane told them to take their seats. After the bell rings, we'll talk about our signs of spring. Then Joey will explain what's in the tank. My friends looked disappointed as they went back to their tables. I was pretty sure they'd be even more disappointed when they found out that there was nothing in the tank but two specks. The bell rang and Mrs. Brisbane took attendance. Now, can we see what's in the tank? Slow down, Simon asked. Mrs. Brisbane smiled and said, Try to be a little bit patient. Now, raise your hand if you'd like to share a sign of spring that you found this weekend. A lot of hands went up. Mrs. Brisbane called on Rolling Rosie first. It's staying light longer in the evening, and it was so warm today. I didn't have to wear my winter coat, just a light jacket, she said. Yes, Mrs. Brisbane nodded. The days start to get longer in the spring. Remember, we set our clocks forward an hour for daylight savings time, so the skies are light a lot longer now. Hurry up, Harry raised his hand. But it's darker in the morning. It's hard to get out of bed when it's dark. He yawned a big yawn. Some of my friends laughed, but Mrs. Brisbane agreed. I have to admit, it's hard for me to get up, too, Harry. Lots of classmates had seen leaves budding on the trees, grass springing out of the ground, and flowers growing. Helpful Holly said to her mom, Mom had taken her shopping for spring clothes. That's a great sign of spring, Mrs. Brisbane said. The stores are full of Easter candy, Thomas said, but my mom won't buy it for me. She says Easter is a long way off. His comment brought more giggles. Small Paul got up and showed the class a new chart he'd made of spring temperatures over the last 10 years. We've been having average temperatures for spring, he said as he pointed to wavy lines and explained them. At last, it was Joey's turn. My dad sent me 2 signs of spring. May I show them now? He asked Mrs. Brisbane. Our teacher said yes, and Joey walked over to our table. In the spring, lots of animals come out of hibernation and have new babies, he said, including these. All eyes were on Joey as he pulled the small blanket off the aquarium. I heard a gasp, then silence. The only one who made a sound was Og. Boing, boing, boing. These are tadpoles, Joey said. I mean, they're going to grow into tadpoles, and tadpoles grow into frogs. They just look like dots now, but pretty soon they'll grow tails and legs and start to become frogs. Everybody was quiet until Og twanged, boing, 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 boing. That made everybody laugh. Stop talking, Sophie's hand shot up. Was Og a tadpole once? Joey nodded. Sure, all frogs were. My friend seemed surprised, and so was I. Can we see them? Philippe asked. Mrs. Brisbane had my friends make a line so that each one could come have a good look. You might be disappointed, I squeaked. They didn't do much. One by one, they came up to the aquarium to look at the specks with Mrs. Brisbane and Joey. What's that goo? Not now, Nicole asked. It's like the inside of an egg, Joey said. He looked up at Mrs. Brisbane. Right? Yes, I think so, she replied, but we will all study tadpoles to learn more about them. Suddenly, Og dived down in the water side of his tank and began splashing loudly. What's wrong with him? Joey asked. Maybe he doesn't want any competition, Mrs. Brisbane said with a smile, or maybe he's excited to have new friends. What's so exciting about 2 new friends when they're only specks? Having a hamster friend is much more interesting. When Tall Paul came up to the tank, he just shook his head. It's hard to believe those 2 dots will become frogs like Og. Boing, boing, Og said. Right, I agreed. Joey explained that they wouldn't be exactly like Og because he was a green frog and they were leopard frogs. Wow, Tall Paul said. Will they have spots? Yep, Joey replied. Helpful Holly asked, will they be our classroom pets like Humphrey and Og? No, 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 I squeaked. They are nothing like Og and me. I'm sorry to admit it, but I didn't like the idea at all. They'll belong to Joey, Mrs. Brisbane said. For now, let's just watch them grow. I watched the specks that night, but I didn't see any changes. Nothing yet, I squeaked to my neighbor. Og stayed strangely silent. When Aldo came into clean room 26, he was surprised to find a new aquarium on the table between Og's tank and my cage. What is this? He asked, peering at the specks. 2 tadpoles, I squeaked. Of course I knew that he didn't understand me. Aldo stared, and then he chuckled. Tadpoles, he said. Twin tadpoles. He kept chuckling as he swept the floor. Twins, twins everywhere. I think I'm seeing double. He turned in Og's direction. How do you feel about twin frogs, Og? But Og just sat there like a rock. Og was silent all night. The specks didn't change one bit. Were they really alive? Although I'm usually active at night, room 26 was so boring I fell asleep. And I didn't wake up until sunlight was streaming through the window and Mrs. Brisbane opened the door. Morning, she said in a cheery voice. Morning, I squeaked. Og was silent. I glanced over and saw that Mrs. Brisbane carried a vase with some very colorful flowers in it. They were red, yellow, orange, and purple. How are these for signs of spring? She asked as she set the vase on her desk. Very nice, I said. By the time she took off her coat, Thomas and Philippe raced into the room. Look at this sign of spring, Thomas spread his arms wide, and turned in a circle. My mom didn't make me wear my winter jacket. I was getting really tired of that old thing. Besides, the arms were getting way too short. I won't be wearing that jacket anymore. Mrs. Brisbane held up the vase of flowers. Here's my sign of spring, tulips. Wow, look at all the colors, Philippe said. Soon, other friends hurried into room 26. Slow down Simon raced through the door, and instead of heading to the cloakroom to hang up his jacket, he ran straight toward our table. Whoa, I can't believe it, he shouted as he gazed down at the aquarium. This is amazing. Philippe, Thomas, Nicole, and Sophie joined him. Wow, Thomas shouted. You've got to see this. Oh, Sophie said. I can't believe it, Nicole added. Philippe just laughed. What? I squeaked as I scurried up to the tippy top of my cage to get a better look. Soon Mrs. Brisbane joined them. Oh, she said as she peered into the aquarium. Oh, that's wonderful. They all stared at the aquarium. I stared too. Instead of two specks stuck in some strange gel, I saw two specks swimming. Og, can you see? I squeaked. Og was still strangely silent. I hoped he wasn't sick with some kind of frog flu. More of my classmates gathered around the aquarium. Mrs. Brisbane made sure they all got a good look at the swimming specks. Oh, calm down, Cassie said. Oh, I've never seen anything so. Oh. I noticed that her hands were shaking. It is something to see, Cassie, Mrs. Brisbane said. I had to admit, swimming specks were more interesting than specks sitting in goo. But were they really that interesting? Joey thought they were. While my friends rushed out for recess, he asked Mrs. Brisbane if he could stay inside and sketch. I want to draw the tadpoles at every stage, he said. I want to get my drawings just right. Mrs. Brisbane smiled. Everybody is supposed to go outside at recess. Mrs. Wright wouldn't like it if you stayed inside. Joey looked so disappointed. Maybe just this once she won't notice, Mrs. Brisbane said. Go ahead and sketch. Joey worked really hard. He'd looked at the swimming specks and then back at his drawing. Good work, Joey, I squeaked. Joey didn't look up, but he said, I want to get it just right, Humphrey. Understand? Of course I understood. I hoped his drawing would help me see what everyone was so excited about. As the day went on, I realized that all my human friends thought the specks were unsqueakably interesting. So interesting that Principal Morales came in to see them after lunch. Amazing, he said. I was getting a little tired of that word. To think that Og started out like this, he said. Everyone looked over at my neighbor, including me. Og just sat there on the rock, silent. When Mr. Morales left, Mrs. Brisbane led my classmates to the library to learn more about tadpoles. Once we were alone in the classroom, I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and ran over to Og's tank. Og, did you see the specks swimming? I asked. Mrs. Brisbane says there'll be frogs like you. Does that make you happy? Og didn't answer, but he stood up and dived into the water side of his tank with a gigantic splash. Had the specks made him speechless? I returned to my cage and started spinning on my wheel. That's what I do when I need to think. Suddenly I realized that swimming was what Og did when he wanted to think. We both had a lot to think about. Humphrey's spring things. Og's a good friend, loyal and true, but do we need another two? And that's the end of chapter 6. Next weekend, I will be reading, starting with chapter 7, and the first chapter is called Test Trouble. That's it, Gators. Thanks for checking in. Hope you're well. I miss you. Bye.